Welcome to the St. Emlyn's podcast. I'm Ian Beardsall.
And I'm Simon Carley.
We are going to have today a special episode, a conference discussion. It feels that the world of the conference has changed and rejuvenated itself since those heady days of smack in the early 2010s, surviving COVID, and now into another world where conferences are making a comeback. And to talk this through, we've managed to get two conference aficionados who both run their own conferences, have spoken at many conferences, and we'll all be together at Incrementum next April. And we thought, why not? Let's talk about what a good conference looks like and how you get there. So our two guests today are David Carr and Haney Mallemat. David, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, it's great to be on this. My first time chatting with you guys in the podcast. I'm an emergency physician from Toronto, Canada, and I run the annual update in emergency medicine at Whistler in British Columbia in Canada every February.
And Haney.
My name is Haney Mallemat. I'm an emergency medicine physician and a critical care doctor here in South Jersey, the Philadelphia area. And I'm very interested in education and seeing how we can go beyond this traditional norms of what conference education is, whether that's in person or online, and really tailor to the audiences of this decade.
And Haney, we're talking just as you've come off the back of ResusX, which is your conference in Philadelphia. And it's quite a small, bespoke kind of thing. It's not the big arena type affair, but you've taken that on. You've organized it yourself. You've got a big social media presence. Give us a bit of an insight into how you decide to do ResusX. What was the initial motivation? And how did you get from that motivation to where you are today?
The initial motivation for creating that conference was just simply, I wanted to have a place where I could invite speakers who are my friends, and I could just be around friends and run a conference that is in my vision of what I would want if I went to go to a conference. All of us have been on the speaking circuit. We've been to conferences, and I'm sure maybe, I don't want to speak for anybody, but maybe more than once you've sat down saying, gosh, this is quite boring and this is not how I would do a conference. Because many conferences are not designed by physician educators. Many times they're by corporate people, admins. And so my thought was, why don't we create a conference that is in the eyes of an educator where people around him are solid educators who are known entities, bring them in and have a fun experience. And that's where it started.
And David, you've been running Whistler for a little while. I've always watched on in envy, although British Columbia is a long way from where I live. But one day, what was your motivation for starting the Whistler conference?
Yeah, I wish I could take credit like Haney in terms of starting it. So it was actually a conference been around for 39 years and I've run it the last 5. It's through our University of Toronto Tri-Division of Emergency Medicine. So it takes pediatric emergency medicine and adult emergency medicine through the 2 training streams. Everyone, when you get involved in a conference, whether you start it de novo or whether you take it over, you want to leave your impression and your mark. And probably similar to Haney, I realized that how I want to speak, how I want the speakers to speak, how I think there was certainly, for me, a very smack coda lens to it, which is I've always judged talks by how much battery life is left on my phone after a talk. And I wanted to have really engaging speakers who understood the value of education and entertainment and a really balanced speaker list that is representative and inclusive and really about hardcore EM. Now, I have speakers that talk about things that I like to hear and that I think people like to hear, but we don't do dives into literature. Really, it's about hardcore emergency medicine for those who are practicing it, not for those who want to just get lost in minutia and detail.
And David, you mentioned SMAC, and I think it's probably worth visiting SMAC as an idea. So we were all around. It is now over 10 years since the first SMAC. It's unbelievable to think we've had a pandemic since that. And SMAC was this huge thing that developed from 3 guys in Australia deciding to do a conference not dissimilar to you've described. And it started in Sydney. I can't remember the year 2013, maybe. And then it grew exponentially into this kind of semi-crazy arena type affair where people were fighting over tickets to go. It was extraordinary. And actually, there's a lot of positives to take from SMAC, but there are also some learning points as well. Simon, when you reflect on the SMAC years, how do you think that has informed what people like Haney and David and others are doing today?
Those are really quite amazing conferences. But the first one was actually quite small. Chris Nixon will tell you that he was a New Zealander. He was a Kiwi. So he always tells me off when I say 3 Australians. It started relatively small, about 600 people, ended up at about 3,000, I think. The legacy it left, in the positive side of things, of which there are many, I think was very much what Haney and David have said already, is that blend of, this is not just about clever people coming and talking at you. This is an experience where you want people to be learners. So it's much more focused on the people's experience of being there and then going away feeling like they've learned something. But also really unashamedly, I think for the first time really, is this idea that there's no shame in giving a presentation, which is both educational, which provides learning, but it's also really interesting. It has a degree of entertainment, has a degree of engagement. And with the population that's coming up now, are junior learners who are used to learning through social media and YouTube and other platforms. If you're not engaging, if you're not an interesting speaker, why the hell should they listen to you? So to me, the legacy is medutainment. It's that blend of medicine, education, and entertainment, putting it into a package which then actually engages the learners of today. I think that's its greatest legacy. And to be honest, that was deliberate. That was their intention. That's what they wanted to do. And I think they achieved it. And then something happened called COVID and it all kind of fizzled away.
And COVID definitely has affected how we all approach these things of being in the same room as each other. We're all used to using Teams online. We're used to doing online recordings. Look at us now. One of us is in the south of England, north of England, Canada and Philadelphia, and we're managing to have a conversation. And I suppose probably now we could talk about the essence of why bother traveling to a conference. There are many reasons why we should all not be getting on aeroplanes. We really have to examine some of what you were saying, which is if I can get it on a video, why fly to Philadelphia? Why fly to Murcia in Spain? Even if it's just an hour, 2 hours, when I could get the same by watching it at home on the telly. So what is the difference?
I think COVID was a big reset for what we looked at with education. The conferences were happening, the SMACs were happening, the CODAs were happening. COVID happened, we started going online and I truly think that people started to reevaluate what it meant to go to a conference once the conferences started opening back up. Asking the question, am I going to get on a plane, fly 3, 4, 5 hours to get somewhere, or I'm just sitting looking at a speaker who's giving me what I could have gotten on a webinar? And to me, that was like a big reset where people started to reevaluate what it meant to go somewhere, what it meant to be present at a conference. And for me personally, I doubled down on that and said, look, if someone's going to come all the way and fly to me, then I better give them not only good content while they're sitting there in the chairs, but as Simon said, give them entertainment. And not only entertainment around when the speakers are on stage, but entertainment in every aspect of them being there. So we have things that are happening before the show. We have things that are happening after the show. We have activities that are happening in Philadelphia. We want people to get there and feel like, wow, the hard-earned money that I earned working or the allocation for my hospital, the CME money, is being put to the most amazing you can possibly get. And what I'm hearing from people who are attending the conferences nowadays are, wow, that was not a conference. It was an experience. Those are their words. And that's really what I'm looking for.
So playing devil's advocate, in the UK, we have a small study leave budget, but it's paid out of taxes, people paying for our study leave. And they may rightly say, particularly when they see that I'm going to go to a conference in Whistler or the Big Sig conference, which is in Zermatt, or any of the other places that we all get to go at times. And so isn't this just a jolly? David, how do you counter that when Haney's described really nicely why the experience matters? But why does the experience then move to improving healthcare? And why is it worth the investment for people to put their hands in their pockets and, in essence, provide that funding for us to go?
In February 2022, we put on Whistler, and there was COVID very active and room restrictions. And we decided to put on the conference where we tested the speakers. They hung out in one room, and the speakers gave a talk while the guests watch from their hotel room. And it was this ridiculous concept that I felt that everyone needed to be together and that, look, I'm a natural extrovert and I wanted people and I wanted to get together and no one was traveling as there was COVID on planes and trains and whatever. So I said, you know what? We're just going to have the speakers talk. Everyone's going to watch from their rooms, and then we'll do some outdoor tented engagement with hot chocolate and a fire pit. And what that taught me was, one, at that point, it was about risk tolerance, who would come to conferences. So we got a younger audience, and skiing maybe naturally selects risk seekers because 75-year-old people afraid of COVID aren't typically the ones who love to downhill ski, although that might not be mutually exclusive. But it created this realization that I just missed hanging out. And I'm not sure that is a cost-effective strategy from your hospital budget point of view to make the argument. But I do believe that it is important to get people from around the world with different perspectives. And I have no doubt at ResusX or at the Royal College Conference and at Mercia for Incrementum, you have a collection of speakers from different countries sharing ideas of how things are done where they work. And you know what? If you want to save lives in emergency medicine, you have to teach and you have to educate. And having a collection of people from diverse backgrounds and diverse practices is why the argument needs to be made for your hospitals to pay and cough up the funds for you to get CME, even if it requires a poor carbon footprint, which is another talk on its own, to cross the Atlantic or go mid-continent to get excellent CME.
Simon, you have a role in a college who are going to be putting on a big conference, and you are partly responsible for suggesting what study leave should be spent on. How do you justify to your colleagues in the UK when people say, look, I've only got £500, I'm going to have to spend another 500 of my own money to go to one of these conferences? How on earth is that worth my while?
I genuinely believe that the quality of the learning experience is better if you're in the room and if you're in the place. And I can give you lots of educational theories to say that I will go and listen to a talk by David Carr. He did a great talk, 10-minute talk on endocarditis. If I want that to stick in my mind, what I want to be doing is walking out of that room and talking to my colleague, embedding that, writing about it, thinking about it. All of those educational theories go along with that. And that's what happens when you're present. If I'm here in my kitchen and I listen to that same talk, I'll be half distracted by what's going on the door. I won't truly be present in the listening point, even at the beginning, and then it's gone. It's a moment in time that just disappears. Now, there are strategies around that, and online conferences can work. And I think we've also got to be very mindful that there's an awful lot of people who, due to financial reasons, family reasons, personal reasons, disability, travel, whatever, can't make it. So online conferences, online experiences are really helpful to that group. And during COVID, it worked. But it's just not the same. Educationally, it doesn't have the idea of SPARA curriculum. It doesn't have the idea of regular recall. It doesn't have the discussion, the argument, all the peripheral things that go around a presentation. That 15-minute slot of someone talking is really just the starting point for somebody to change their practice. And ultimately, CME, CPD is about getting people in a room and either reinforcing their current practice because they now know it is the right thing to do, or making change. And actually change doesn't happen in that room, it happens around it.
So if we take it as read that this audience that we're currently, if we take it as read that as a group, we're pretty convinced that these are good things. And I have to say, I'm a new convert. I had a big time where I loved conferences and I went usually on my own and I had a great time. I'm different to you, David. I'm an introvert. I valued the time on my own. And I do find some of the bits around conferences exhausting. But then I've started going back to conferences, both participating and just going to conferences, and have found that actually my cheat method is going with my partner. I'm lucky enough that she's able to come along, and that's my offload. So when I have enough of all you guys, I go to chat to her. But let's imagine that we agree that conferences are a good thing. How do you then set about with a program, Haney, to make sure that it delivers, is representative, is going to provide what people want?
To me, the most important thing is just understanding what the audience is going to need in terms of their attention. And so when you're designing a conference, I think you have to keep in mind is who's going to be seeing the audience. Are you designing the conference for the end of career professor who's used to seeing a certain type of content, or are you building it for a social media heavy, short attention span, podcast listening type of audience? And I think once you find that focus, then you start to design the curriculum around that. And we've doubled down on super short talks. We've doubled down on getting away from actually slide presentations. Even for some people who are very good presenters in front of slides, we've opted for more couch sessions and discussions, more of a podcast, because that's what's familiar to people. The people that fail at conferences are the ones that fail to identify who their audience is and don't tailor the content to them. If you are putting on a lecture that is 35 minutes long, you're going to lose people because that is not what people are consuming on a daily basis. People want quick hit social media stuff, scroll through things. You can argue whether or not that's the right thing for a learner, but it doesn't matter because that's what's happening right now. And if you don't acknowledge that, and if you don't accept it, then you're going to lose those people. I'm not saying that's the way I want to learn, but I understand that's how the majority of the people that come to my conference learn. And so I'm going to go ahead and give them the content in that format. And that's what's sticky. People say, hey, I love the short format lectures. Hey, I love the fact that there weren't tons of talks with slides. And so it's just a testament to looking at the audience first and then building it from there.
But that's obviously a real challenge because a lot of our routine speakers are used to doing routine talks, which are slide based. They are bullet point heavy. They are information overload. And I think what we're describing at the moment, some people would call that as being disruptive. And that always makes me sound edgy. Paco, who is running the Incrementum conference, when he heard we were having a chat, and he said, I said, well, me and Haney are going to chat. He said, oh, two of the most disruptive conference people there are. I thought, bloody hell, I don't want to be disruptive. I'm just like normal. But is it becoming more normal? And how do you persuade the old guard that this is okay?
I think Haney really captured it so well. You have to understand your audience and you have to understand your conference. And the first question I always ask is, are people coming to the conference or the city or the destination? Now, I happen to run a destination conference, and I happen to know that there's a whole bunch of people who pay money for a tax deferral, which is available in places like Canada or US, where you can write off against your income. And they actually just want to ski and they want to come to a little bit of the talks. If I'm having a conference in no disrespect, in Philly, I'm actually coming to go see the conference. And at Whistler, we have a bit of a mix. We have a conference that goes from 7 till 9 in the morning and then from 4 to 7, but skiing is a big part. So I think you have to really understand your audience and you really have to sell. We have to evolve to the education of the people that are attending in clearly short bursts. And it's not for everything. You're not going to be able to attract all speakers. I think the other thing which is important as an organizer is you have to know who you're getting and you have to coach them around. Here's the audience. Here's how they like to be educated. This is what they need to know. And this is the degree of difficulty that you need to have in format so that this is what works for us. Every audience different. I have no doubt that if you go to RChem or you go to ResusX or Incrementum, those are completely different audiences and target, and you cannot educate and teach them the same way to have the same success.
I'm really interested in this concept of coaching. There's always been this presumption, hasn't there, that the more senior you become, it's just a natural that you'll be able to educate. All of us here know in this room that there are some fantastic researchers, some amazing clinicians who just can't work in that space. But there might be somebody who you really want to get to come along because of the work they've done, or because they're really truly groundbreaking in what they've done. Do you offer coaching? Do you support people? And how do you handle that sort of critique about maybe bringing along somebody who's got a bit of a reputation, but they can't really engage with your audience?
I'll take that one because I have a non-private conference in that my goal is to promote faculty. So yes, we have to have a platform that has amazing speakers that people will come, but I also want to develop talent. And that requires coaching, whether that's you as the organizer or people on your committee, like the people that I have. But I think there also has to be told one thing, and I don't know if the three of you have observed this, but we're all of similar ages, genders. We all are similar peeps. I can tell you that when I was 30 something years old, all I wanted to do was hear my own voice at conferences. All I wanted to do was be part of that circuit. I find that nowadays, less and less are my new star staff who are coming in. They actually don't aspire to be on the speaker circuit. They need so much more pushing. I just find that people don't necessarily want to do it. Well, I waited for this call for SMAC, for CODA, for Whistler. Henny, Simon, maybe you guys have had similar experiences. I have to promote our junior people, but they're just not there the same way the mid-career and late career are.
I find some of the same things. I don't see this emergence of the next gen. I certainly have people that reach out often and say, hey, listen, I can give a talk at ResusX. Just to pivot a little bit to Simon's question, in terms of that, when it comes to coaching, I don't coach those people. There's a system that they need to go through where they may start off doing a podcast with me, then a virtual conference so I can see their style, or they need a portfolio to submit. I'm very careful about the people I pick because there's a certain style. And if we just let the traditional in, it starts to dilute experience. I do something what SMAC did. All of us are familiar with it, but SMAC was very deliberate about telling people, look, this is not going to be bullet point talks. Do not do this. Do not do that. The talks are going to be this long. It's going to be moderated. And I think they did a good job. And I'm not that deliberate about the instructions to the speakers, But there is an expectation when people come give talks, that's going to be the vibe that they give. It's not going to be a lot of words, very picturesque slides, all the stuff that we've come to appreciate. The last thing is the point that Simon brought up. What do you do with a person who's just so good? They're a really good educator. You pass them in the hallway, you hear them teaching residents or medical students. They're so good, but once you put them in front of a projector, they revert to that traditional boring PowerPoint. What we've done, because I don't want to lose those educators, is we've turned off the screens, we've turned off the slides, we sit them down in a chair, we have a discussion. The transition to a podcast type thing where I say, hey, listen, you tell me all the things that you want to talk about, and I'm going to turn to a script, and I'm just going to ask you questions about the things you want me to ask you about. And when we've done that for the past 2 years, let me tell you, the people who completely suck at giving presentations, and I'll use that word, are brilliant on stage, and people want to hear more of them.
You're meeting them halfway, aren't you? Instead of you just trying to say, you've got a mold towards me, you're meeting them in the middle and trying to find a different thing. And Ian, at Incrementum last year, there were two things, wasn't there? There's a session I did at the middle of the day where we sat down and talked. And there's your session at the end of the day. We had a little bar on the stage where we just went back and reviewed all the interesting points of the day with the speakers. So, that spaced repetition was almost built into the conference. And that element, I thought it worked really well.
You just find people and know what they do well. If they're good discussion people, make them discussion. If they're good proceduralists, then put them in front of a procedure table and have them do nothing more but walk through a procedure. You just start to find the strengths in people and then double down on that in front of an audience. And then you seem like this innovator where you're like, wow, no one's done a lecture like that. And simply what you're doing is you're just knowing your faculty and allowing them to shine at what they do best.
I think one of the things I've noticed, particularly with the conferences I've enjoyed the most, is a conference sets itself up so that the people who are there can relax. And by that, I mean they're not on edge the whole time, worrying that the speaker's going to not be great or have real struggle or be really nervous or die on stage, or that the person moderating or hosting is going to ask uncomfortable questions, or that it's not going to run to time, or all the things that make us sit there and actually you can't enjoy what you're seeing because you're too busy panicking that the person is going to have a difficult time. And you worry about that. And I think there is something about having a faculty who the audience either know or can believe in. It's led by somebody who will support people. So I was lucky enough to do an Incrementum, the hosting thing. We'll be doing it again next year, whereby they can think, okay, I get this Beardsall guy. I watched him on day one. He seemed to keep things running. I don't have to worry that things aren't going to work. And I think you get that from the moment you walk in, don't you? When you get the idea about picking up your name badge and you're on a list, and these little bits that make a conference feel a place where you can just not worry. And the only thing you have to worry about is learning stuff, enjoying yourself, and perhaps where you're going to eat the next evening. But there are conferences, I think, sometimes where, particularly the host role, I suppose I can talk to you a bit. I know, Haney, you've done it, and Taylor, you've done it as well, that it's an underappreciated role, I think, whereby often it's given to the conference organizers' friends who perhaps aren't necessarily up for doing a talk, but they want to be involved. And they also want to be able to put it on their CV. And so all too often, the person who leads a session or chairs a session or moderates the questions, it goes to the person who they just want to keep involved. And one of the things I've hopefully learned is that actually there is a skill to that maybe is under-recognized, but maybe I'm just talking myself into jobs now. But I don't know what you guys think about that particular role.
Yeah, it's hard to organize a conference. We all get cold emails from people. And I think to Andy's point, I'm always looking at, can you send me some materials and stuff like that? I think the unspoken thing here is that Andy and I run a conference that is targeted, and all of our speakers speak English as their first language. It's got international attendees, but the presenters are for the most part all American or Canadian or English speaking. And also from a quality control point of view, you might have 10 faculty or 20, you don't have 100. And I think when you go to ISOM or you go to USOM or you go to very large international conferences, clearly we've all learned to pick speakers, not topics. You as an attendee are going to say, oh, Simon Carley's speaking. I couldn't care what he's talking about, but I'm going to go hear him because I have no idea who this person is. And he's a trusted resource. So I think when you pick conferences, you know your size and you obviously have to, realize how difficult it is to pick a lineup. But there's a lot of things. You have to balance for a lot of things. For me, it's adults, pediatric, it's representation. That's super important, and giving people all opportunities and not just having it as a fraternity boys club, which it has historically been. And you want to bring quality and you want to support it. And if you just have the old boys club, those conferences are the ones that are stale and done. They're extinct. So I think we've all learned that to run a conference today takes maybe more than just momentum, and you have to be innovative and appreciate things. And I think you can't just tap your friends, you have to tap stars.
Simon, I'm going to ask you a difficult question now, and one you may not want to answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. So we endeavored to set up a conference for St. Emlyn's, and we tried to be innovative. I think we were inspired a bit by Bad EM, which you'd been to, and I tried to go to, but COVID got in the way, which is a South African conference. And we were going to do St. Emlyn's live, and it was going to be in the hills of the Northwest. And we had these great visions. And actually, despite the St. Emlyn's brand, if that's a brand we can talk about, and having speakers that we thought were going to be attractive, it just didn't get the numbers going that meant it was going to be viable, and we had to call it off at no small expense to certain people, including yourself. What do you think it was that we didn't do quite right there? Was it just bad timing, bad luck, something unknown, or can we learn from that experience for when we're thinking about the next thing?
I think it's multifactorial. It did fall in the middle of the junior doctor strikes, which was poor. We tried to do it as a more family-orientated experience. So it was supposed to be an idea that you could bring your family with you. So we actually ran it over a weekend. I think that was probably a mistake, because the vast majority of people are busy doing other stuff at the weekends, and so they didn't want to come along to that. So I think that's fair enough. That's reasonable. It was probably a little bit too innovative. So essentially, for people who don't remember it, because St. Emlyn's Wild, it was based on an old army thing called a marching shoot, essentially. So there would be a 10-kilometer walk through the hills of the Lake District. It's going to be absolutely beautiful. And during that 10-kilometer walk, actually it wasn't 10 kilometers, it was about 5K in the end. Along that 5K walk, there were a number of tasks that you did, some of which were medical and some of which were leadership and organizational. And it was done as a competition. And the idea was that would develop into this research, leadership, complex issues type thing. It would have been a hoot. We had so many amazing things planned. But I think when people saw it on paper, they thought, geez, what the hell is this? It's just too far away from what I would expect. And unfortunately, although we mapped the whole conference to curriculum in intensive care medicine, anesthetics, emergency medicine, and pre-hospital care, a lot of the senior educators looked at it and said, this is not training. It would have been the best training ever, honestly. We had an amazing program, loads of clinical content, loads of all those difficult things to get around leadership, complex problem solving, all mapped out. And they just went, doesn't look like a conference. I'm not going to fund it. Even people I know, even people locally, who would say, no, not going to do it. So that was a real shame. It was just too innovative at the wrong time.
One of the things that's amazing about your podcast is that you have a huge audience, right? And you have people, as David said, that will come just listen to you talk about whatever it is you'll talk about. And so perhaps that conference was too innovative. Maybe it needs to be curbed in for the first year or two to something more recognizable to people. But I can't help but think that this is an amazing opportunity that you might be sleeping on, because you have an audience that's going to fill the chairs of your listeners already. And then the first year is people who sit in, who know who you are. Then they tell their friends at home, did you know there was this podcast that I went to and I sat in on their conference that they held for their first year? You should come next year. And then they come next year. And then it spreads like that. And I'm just telling you this because that's exactly what happened with my comp. It came as very niche, like 120 people the first year, people who in the audience, the only advertising we did was on social media as people who knew my content and also the other speakers' content. But now it's grown to a point where there are people coming who don't know the social media stuff. And all that's to say that you have an audience that's there. I think as long as you refine it to something that people are somewhat familiar with, even though you're going to do your own spin on it because you guys are magnificent, innovative educators, you just have an audience that's going to be built in for year one. So I think an opportunity that I would certainly try again if you asked me.
Haney, this is probably where we should mention social media and social media presence and whether that matters. So you are humbly sitting there with over 200,000 Instagram followers. How much do you need significant social media followership in order to be successful as a clinician educator, conference organizer? Is this part of the modern world? To do the sort of content you're doing is really hard work. Where does it sit in the part of educating and also a bit of the self-promotion of what you want to do in your career?
I've always done this because it's just what I enjoy doing. So by no means is anything that I'm doing on social media now a vehicle to commercialization of the education. I love what I do. I'll do it even if there's no conference because I've done it even before there were conferences. Now, that being said, how do people get recognized in this day and age? What's the recognition? It used to be you went to the big conferences, you spoke on stage, people knew who you were, and then people would trust you from there. As David said, that model is no longer there. So where do you go? You go where the attention is. And you got to believe that people are on social media. And I'm not talking about X anymore because I don't think the new generation of educators are on X. I think people are on Instagram, on TikTok. I love educating. I'm comfortable being on screen. But if you're not, then I would suggest getting comfortable on screen and building education. And then once you have that platform, I think it's much easier to pull people in. Is it impossible for someone who doesn't have a social media following to go out there and build a conference? I don't think so, but I think you're going to be relying more on word of mouth, or your ascent to becoming known will be a lot shallower. But when you're known, a known entity, it climbs a lot faster. People start sharing the pictures from the conference. And the last thing I'll say is that you don't need 200,000 followers. You don't need 60,000 followers. You need 1,000 solid followers who trust you, who follow you, who understand you to come to your conferences. Because 1,000 people, 10% of that is 100 people to come to your conference. That's a good conference if you can get 100 people to conference. 5% of that, 50 people to come to your conference is a good attendance at a conference, and you just build from there. So I don't want anyone to think that, oh, I only have 10,000 followers. There's no way. That's a great number. There's 10,000 people who are hanging on every word that you're saying. Double down on that and make an experience that's built around the type of content that you create and the people who you feature on your content.
So we've talked quite a lot about conferences, how you set them up, where you get your speakers from, how you coach your speakers, what you try and deliver. We perhaps haven't touched much about how can you ensure that your conference delivers not just on that day, but on the week after. What do you do, David, to try and make sure that what's happened in Whistler then translates to the emergency rooms of Toronto?
I pay a lot of attention to the feedback process. And what's great is one of the conference committee organizers on my committee, Andrew Petrosoniak, we had this like really lengthy feedback form that all the people are mandated to fill out in order to get their CME credits. Basically, he put all the 250 forms through ChatGPT and analyzed all the data of our feedback. And it was revolutionary. He found trends on everything that was captured. And it was like, wow, that was fantastic. Why are people filling out all these forms? And I think what was something that we always are asked to do more of is socialization. And I think especially if your majority of your people are not living in the city where the conference is taking place, they actually want to be part with the speakers. They want that engagement. And I have no doubt Incrementum, having never been there, but excited for it, will do well. That was what SMAC was about. And I think what we want is those opportunities outside the classroom where that knowledge is discussed amongst people with different perspectives, with the speakers, without the speakers. It has to percolate. So I think having a social program is a really important part to complement your academic program.
The Big Sick conference in Zermatt, which is also an amazing conference. One of the things they do, we started a little bit in SMAC back in the day, but they do particularly well is the evening sessions where you may have talks during the day, but in the evening, in the hotel, in many different rooms, in the bars, all that kind of space, little areas where people are having short, really focused, hands-on educational experiences. And it's really very much one-to-one, small group work, speaking to the people who are experts. And there's a huge amount of cross-learning between experts in that. Real discussions that come out of that. I know for a fact several research projects have come out of those conversations at 9 o'clock at night in a bar in Zermatt. It's where the magic happens. And this is such an overused phrase, but honestly, I genuinely believe it's true.
So we've taken all this experience. The socialization is important. This is about just meeting people with similar experience or even different experience, but that you can take on and form as part of what you're going to do next. But where does this relate into what happens in the actual departments that people are working in? How can we encourage them as people who participate in conferences or organize conferences that we make it relevant for actual healthcare practice and improving patients' care and what happens in hospitals?
I don't know that you, on an advertisement for a conference, you can do that. I really don't. If you're doing social media first, if you're forward facing like that, and you're getting feedback from your following that people are saying, hey, listen, that post that you did last night, I saw somebody who had just the same thing. Or last week, there was this thing that you posted and it completely changed the management. Once you have that stickiness with your content, you just double down on it in person and you do more of the same thing that you've been doing. And the testament is that from this last week, I'm getting lots of DMs, and some of the faculty who were there as well are getting DMs saying, hey, listen, I went back to my institution. They weren't using ultrasound for this or that. And now we're having a committee meet, and you really changed something. You changed the trajectory of things. When you have people who are there, who are innovators, who are already changing people's practices on a day-to-day basis by the content that they're putting out, you just trust that when you go to a conference, it's going to be more of the same.
We had a radiologist speak at our conference, and that was something that I was like, okay, this could go one way or the other. But when Jeff Jaskoka spoke at our conference last year, he had a talk that had 2 graphics and they were screenshots, which basically addressed 2 things: contrast allergies and contrast nephropathy. And when you had a radiologist there saying, I want you to take this slide and show it to your division head in radiology, and that you don't have to wait for creatinine and you don't have to have a 13-hour protocol. And here's the resource. And it was done by radiologists. There is no excuse that you should have to wait hours. You should be forced to do creatinine. Do you know how many people in the conference, like, it was like a standing ovation. So you, Ian, if you want to move the needle, you have to have people with ideas, in the same way that when Scott Weingart said, you just put some oxygen in your nose when you're about to intubate, and that was going to help out a little bit. And you're like, why the hell didn't I think about that? You have to have the people who are going to make things happen and the references to do it, and then they take it back. But if you're just talking about the same boring topics all the time, it's just nothing's going to happen. You're not going to change the world.
You have to design your conferences the audience in mind. So David's example is a perfect one. What is important to emergency medicine physicians? Those 2 things. And so you're going to double down on them. There's lots of directions that could have gone in, but what's most important? Those 2 things. And for anyone who's designing, whether it's a conference or a podcast or a social media video, just think about who's on the other end of the screen. It's not about you. It's not about showcasing a faculty who got this or that award. It's who's listening and what it means to them.
We've got to recognize that not everybody can get to conferences. We are talking about conferences in high-income countries with people who've got access to study budgets and time and money. And there's an awful lot of people out there who can't make it. So we do need to think about them as well. So I think we've all got a responsibility, and we all do this, but I think a lot of other conferences need to get on this, is that we got the content that happens in the room. That's the best way to do it. We really want people to do that. If you're not there, then I think everybody who attends and everybody who organizes this has got a responsibility to amplify it through blogs, through podcasts. Going back to your department, you've been to a great conference at UCEN in Vienna, or you've been to ResusX. Go back and present to your colleagues. Tell them what you learn. Make sure that those lessons spread out as much as possible. So I think everybody who's involved in this has a responsibility to help everyone else as best they can to get all the good stuff out of these conferences. And wherever possible, if we can make it accessible to people from lower income countries, middle income countries, to try and get to conferences or to get hold of the content and stuff like that, then obviously that's something that we all do already and we would advocate for others to do as well.
Drawing that all together, and one of the reasons we have come together is we will all be at Incrementum next April, one of those disruptive small conferences that we've been talking about that has made real efforts to innovate and do things differently. And there's a lot that I'm looking forward to about Murcia. The curious thing that happened to me in Murcia last year, I was busy doing the hosting thing and all that other stuff, but I actually watched all of the talks. And most of the time when I go to a conference, if I've been a speaker, I tend to avoid the talks and just sit quietly rocking in a corner. But they were so good that I felt I had to go and watch them. And the other thing that I really struggle with is this idea of a community. I don't like the idea that you go along and you have to become part of a family. And if you're not part of the Smack family or the Incrementum family, it's not a thing. But actually, there was a community at Incrementum that I really quite enjoyed. And Haney and David, I'm really excited for you to be there too. Very briefly, but as I've got you, what are the bits that you're looking forward to most, Haney and David, having only seen Incrementum from the outside?
For me, it's just being inspired by other educators. The stuff that I saw online circulating is the passion of education that I love. And I hope to be inspired by the speaker's style of speaking so I can pick things up for my own education. And of course, just the innovative medical stuff that I can bring home to my patients in the States.
And David, you are a conference aficionado. You go to many conferences. Why would this be any different?
I think location, I'm certainly interested in going to that place. It looks beautiful and charming. I'm certainly interested in the community that you described. And to be very honest, from an international conference, and for me, international means crossing the Atlantic or Pacific and leaving North America. I think it's a conference that has something really special, and there's a feel to it that it's tangible, it's palpable, that seems to set this apart from other European conferences. And whether they're picking off and where other things left off, whether they're starting something new, it certainly seems to be a thrill and excitement around this. And I'm very honored to be part of the team, to be part of the community. And I think they seem to really do it well. I just feel that way.
It's been such a joy to see you all. I'm very excited about April, even more because we don't spend enough time in the same room. David, I've never been in the same room as you, at least not knowingly, so I can't wait for that. But it's really kind of you to share your thoughts. I think that the world of conferences is an exciting place to be. And a time where being an emergency physician or critical care physician or working in hospitals at all can get you down a bit. Actually, these times where you can go and just see and be inspired and be rejuvenated, they're really valuable to us all. And even just having this conversation has built me up a little bit and made me more excited about the next day I go to work. Thank you so much for joining us.